Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News. Today is Saturday. It is the 12th day of April, 2025. And as the negotiations or discussions in Oman begin between the United States and Iran with respect to their nuclear program, let's just say the stories that have come across the wire late last night and today are not good at all. Let's get right to the headlines. Steve Witkoff says U.S. demands Iran scrap its nuclear program, but hints at a possible compromise. Whenever you say but, whatever you've said previously has just been wiped out. Yes, you're gonna have to scrap your nuclear program, but and we'll talk about this compromise he's talking about. All right, on an Omani source, talks have started, and here's what they say. The U.S.-Iran talks are focused on calming the region, prisoner swaps, and a nuclear deal. Notice nothing about destroying or abandoning Iran's nuclear program. It's all about calming the region, as it were, the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, in a third headline, expects a new agreement between Iran and the U.S. to, quote, restrain Tehran more. Notice restrain them more, not end their program, just restrain them. And finally, Israel submits to a softened hostage deal, offers Hamas delegation heads to Cairo. They are compromising again on the hostage deal with respect to Hamas, and that doesn't look good either. And Steve Witkoff, of course, is the middle of all of this. All right, so to say things do not look good for Israel is a vast understatement, as we will see today. Also, later on today's your Bible questions answer, we're going to start a number of episodes on the rapture of the church, explain what it is, and go kind of through it for you. It should be a big help. So we'll be having that today later. So I'm sure you'll want to look at that. Your Bible questions answered first question is what is the rapture of the church? We can talk about that and then go on and on with detail about other things about the rapture. All right, let's get the headlines. This is from Israel National News. Witkoff says U.S. demands Iran scrap the nuclear program, but hints at possible compromise. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff reveals Washington's initial demand for Iran to dismantle its nuclear program ahead of critical talks, while signaling potential room for compromise. Ahead of pivotal negotiations this weekend in Oman, U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff stated on Friday that preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon remains a non-negotiable red line for the Trump administration. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, he stressed that Washington will open the dialogue with firm demands. Tehran must dismantle its nuclear infrastructure. However, he acknowledged that negotiations may require some flexibility. I think our position begins with dismantlement of your program. That is our position today, Witkoff told the newspaper. This doesn't mean, by the way, that at the margin, we're not going to find other ways to find compromise between the two countries. He emphasized one boundary remains immovable, where our red line will be there can't be weaponization of your nuclear capability. These remarks reflect the internal deliberations of the Trump administration as it weighs the prospect of diplomacy against the potential necessity of military intervention. Should Iran refuse to shutter its nuclear program, Witkoff says the final decision would rest with President Donald Trump, who would then assess the administration's next steps in dealing with Tehran's nuclear ambitions. Now, get this. Witkoff described the initial encounter in Iran as foundational. This is about trust building. It is about talking about why it is so important for us to get a deal, not the exact terms of the deal, he told the Wall Street Journal, adding that any eventual agreement would have to include extensive verification mechanisms to ensure Iran is not pursuing nuclear weapons in secret. Trump stated this week that the talks in Oman would be direct, but Iranian officials insisted that the encounter between Witkoff and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi would involve indirect engagement rather than face-to-face talks. Witkoff expressed hope that future discussions could be more direct as mutual trust is built, according to the Wall Street Journal. And on Wednesday, Trump said if military action is required to thwart Iran's nuclear program, Israel would be involved and even lead the effort. If you recall, when the talks were first suggested or first mentioned that this Saturday, today, there would be talks by Donald Trump. Witkoff got on was asked about it. And the first thing he said, well, it's got to be direct talk, so we're not going to talk. We're going to have to talk to them direct. That's our stance. Iran says, no, they're going to be indirect. Who won? They're indirect talks to begin with. So again, Witkoff is not the man. Now, as we say here, He's not the person that should be negotiating for the United States of America. In fact, his opening remarks show he's an incompetent fool. He is totally out of his league. Using phrases such as building trust with Iran is something that's impossible. Now, Israel has a short window of opportunity to destroy Iran's nuclear program. Recall Iran's air defenses last October were obliterated by Israel's attack. That can be repaired. So if these talks drag on, then it will make it all the more difficult for Iran to be neutralized to the place that's necessary. Now, what's interesting, when you read the article here on Israel from Israel National News, the comments are incredible. I'm going to read you a number of comments here because it kind of says it all. Here we go. What a great, smart negotiator. Compromise is possible. The Iranians must be laughing their heads off. That's from one commentator. Here's another commentator. Nothing will make your enemies rightfully laugh at you more with utmost disrespect than making a demand and a compromise at the same time. Just ask Israel. They do it all the time. We demand that you release all of our hostages at once, or at least 5 of them. Plus, we will still deliver 1,000 truckloads of humanitarian aid every week. And can we also interest you in a 90-day ceasefire? Okay, a third commentator. Kicking the can down the road is an impotent gesture in the Biden administration mode, constituting surrender to Islam, Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea. Verification hasn't worked in the past, therefore there's no reason to believe it will in the future. Trump falters on the main point. He should be locking and loading the big guns at this very moment. Failure here will destroy his legacy. And another commentator on the article said this. Iran doesn't really care what the outcome of this talk today brings because they have no intention, all uppercase letters, of stopping their goal of having a nuclear weapon. They can agree to any deal that the U.S. offers because lying in order to meet the objective of Allah in their religion is permitted. And that's exactly true. In Islam, you can lie to get your own, to further your own ends. It's permitted. And so they're lying one step after another, for everything they're going to tell Witkoff. They're going to tell him what he wants to hear. And this guy, this dupe will come out and say, well, we've building trust now. This is really look like it's going to work. And they're going to just string him along on and on because you have someone there who doesn't belong. And this is really sad. It's sad, and it's I don't know what other words to use, disastrous with respect to the United States. You don't put a guy who's a real estate man, who is a golf partner of Donald Trump, who's actually worked with Qatar and is kind of beholden to them, which is a country that is very much financially, supporting all these terrorist activities, and then think you're going to get a good outcome. Anyway, now we got the first report of what's actually going on. It's from the Times of Israel, just beginning to come through with these stories. It's from an Omani source. U.S.-Iran talks focused on calming the region, prisoner swaps, nuclear deal. It's from Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Talks between Iran and the U.S. are focused on de-escalating regional tensions, prisoner exchanges, and limited agreements to ease sanctions in exchange for controlling Iran's nuclear program, an Omani source told Reuters. Iran and the United States began high-level talks in Oman on Saturday, aimed at jump-starting negotiations over Tehran's fast-advancing nuclear program, with U.S. President Donald Trump threatening military action if there is no deal. Now, notice the article. De-escalating tensions, easing sanctions, etc., controlling Iran's nuclear program. Nothing about eliminating or destroying their capability to deliver a bomb to Israel and then to the United States. Nothing whatsoever. It sounds like just a bunch of friends getting together. And we're just going to kind of de-escalate things because there's kind of some high tensions here, but everything will work out in the end. Now, a third story, this is from the Jerusalem Post. Same type of attitude here. Look at this from Saudi Arabia. They expect new agreement between Iran, U.S. to restrain Iran more. Saudi Arabia expects any new nuclear agreement to restrain Iran will be much more than the Obama-era JCPOA had, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, done 10 years ago. Saudi Arabia expects any new agreement from these talks will restrain them more than the previous nuclear agreement, said a source in the Saudi royal family to Israel's broadcaster Khan, KAN, on Friday night. The comments come as American and Iranian negotiators arrive at Oman to begin discussion on a deal that would see Iran give up all nuclear weapons development and allow for the destruction of the facilities. This would be a serious step up from the terms of the previous JCPOA, which only limited Iran's nuclear facilities and production. No, it really didn't, but anyway, that's how the story goes. This source told Khan if Iran really opens up its nuclear facilities, and allows full supervision of them, and in addition abandon its branches in the region, and we avoid war, then that is a good result. They emphasize Saudi Arabia would expect the new agreement to restrain Iran much more than the JCPOA had. The source said Saudi Arabia wanted increased stability, and that currently it seemed as if these things were swinging between a solid agreement and war. Now, again, notice the words here: restrain, better agreement. Again, nothing about ending Iran's nuclear quest to destroy Israel. And the laughable thing, if they open up their nuclear facilities, they'll never do that. They never have done it in the past. They hide things because, again, their goal, as they have stated for decades, is the destruction of the state of Israel and then eventually the destruction of the United States of America. How many times do we have to say this? But the Western world, it's like they've got blinders on. They think, well, they just don't really mean it. That's just for, local consumption. That's not really what they mean. No, it's exactly what they mean. Now, to make matters worse, headline number 4: Israel submits softened hostage deal offer as Hamas delegation heads to Cairo. Again, Witkoff is behind this too. Officials told the Times of Israel that Israel slightly reduced the number of living hostages in its demand, but wants speedier results. Agreed to withdraw, and again, this agreed to withdraw from recently captured areas. Holds talk on permanent ceasefire. Israel's come down slightly from an earlier demand for 11 hostages to be released as part of a deal with Hamas to revive a ceasefire that collapsed last month. Two officials familiar with the matter told the Times of Israel yesterday, Friday. Last month, Israel demanded the release of 11 living hostages in exchange for restoring the ceasefire. For its part, Hamas said it's willing to release 5 living hostages. For several weeks, both sides refused to compromise further, and the talks remained at an impasse as Israel expanded its military campaign through Gaza, which it resumed on March 18th. Seeking to meet the sides halfway, Egypt in recent days began pushing a new proposal that would see 8 living hostages released. Now, here, listen to this. Israel would also agree to allow the resumption of humanitarian aid deliveries into Gaza and withdraw its troops to where they were positioned in the Strip before it resumed fighting on March 18th and recaptured swaths of the enclave. We talked about this yesterday, and there's a story today. Israel's doing a great job, basically, of hemming in Hamas, of cutting off the possibility of bringing any type of weapons or any type of material in from Egypt to Hamas to resupply them by having like a 1.1 mile buffer zone there, which they moved all the people out of the city of Rafah, which is on the border, and Israel will be in complete control of that. Therefore, nothing would get through to resupply Hamas. That's what they've done. But according to this agreement, they'd have to move back to where they were before, and so all that would be for naught. And so here we go. Permanent ceasefire. That's what they're talking about also. Israel agreed to hold negotiations on the terms of a permanent ceasefire once the truth had been restored. So they're also going to talk about that. All right, so permanent ceasefire, Palestinian state, Hamas still in power, and it's still in power. So when Israel is finding success in backing Hamas into a corner, now they want to give up what they've just earned. This is insane. All right, we'll have more later to sum up. The headlines this morning look bad for Israel. We trust something will change, so please stay tuned. Okay, we'll be back again later with more updates, but it really is horrible with this man Witkoff doing this with the whole mentality as well. All they're going to do is negotiate some deal to kind of, take a little bit away from Iran's nuclear program. Not destroy it. They don't want to do that. Just have some more friendly relations here in the Middle East. This is not good, folks. So anyway, we'll keep in touch with everything that's going on. I'm Don Stewart. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.